Hello students, I'm Dr. Anita Pandey from Sri Shankaracharya Mahavidyalaya Jinwane Bhilai, and today I'm going to tell you all about World Trade Organization. So let's first have an introduction and understand what exactly is this organization and its aims and objectives. So, the World Trade Organization is an intergovernmental organization that is concerned with the regulation of international trade between nations. So, why is this organization called an intergovernmental organization? It is because it functions as an intermediary, as a body, or I should say, governing body between various governments of various countries that are its members. It regulates or makes treaties or pacts or lays down rules for governing the trade between international trade between various member countries, as well as the barriers to international trade that those countries erect for protecting their domestic industry. So the WTO officially commenced on 1st January 1995 under the Marrakesh Agreement signed by 123 nations on 15th April 1994, replacing the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff (GATT), which commenced in 1948. So earlier there was this GATT, that is General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, that used to govern international trade, but the Marrakesh Agreement, but there was a need of reforms, there changes, because market situations were changing quite dramatically and the situation was getting dynamic. So to overcome that, the Marrakesh Agreement was signed by 123 nations back in 15th April 1994, and through that agreement, WTO came into existence on 1st January 1995. It is the largest international economic organization in the world and has 164 member states at present. Here by state, it is meant as countries. So, as of today, there are 164 member states or member nations from as compared to 123 nations that were there or signed the Marrakesh Agreement at the outset. The WTA is currently presided by Mr. Roberto Azzurro. So he is the current president of WTO. Now let's learn something about GATT negotiation before Uruguay. So 7 rounds of negotiation occurred under General Agreement on Trade and Tariff from 1949 to 1979. The first real GATT trade rounds 1947 to 1960 concentrated on further reducing tariffs. Then the Kennedy round in the mid 60s brought about a GATT anti-dumping agreement and a section on development. So the first real GATT trade rounds or the discussions that were held were more concentrated on reducing tariffs. By tariff here we mean taxes. So the first round was more focused on reducing taxes on international trade and commerce between various member countries. Then the Kennedy round was all about a GATT anti-dumping agreement. Now, what is dumping? So, dumping is happens when a country dumps its some of its product at a very cheap price in another country, and by dumping I mean he floods the market of those country by mass production, or supplies a huge quantity of that product that is being dumped at a very reduced price, so that the domestic industry of the target nation is not able to compete. So the Tokyo round during the 70s represented the first major attempt to tackle trade barriers that do not take the form of tariff, and to improve the system, adopting a series of agreements on non-tariff barriers, which in some cases interpreted existing GATT rules and in other broke entirely new ground. So then there was Tokyo round. Now here we are discussing some of the major rounds and the major decisions that were taken during those rounds. So the Tokyo round was which happened during 70s, was the first major attempt to tackle trade barriers. Now trade barriers, taxes or tariffs as we refer to them, are of course a very major part of trade barriers, but they are not the only ones. No, some countries there is a general sense. Then there are some countries, like we have in income tax, we have DTAA between various countries to ensure that double taxation doesn't happen. But some countries, like say United Kingdom or Singapore, have received most favored nation status from India, whereas others such as Pakistan don't have that, right? So there are various ways other than taxes that can be used to erect trade barriers, such as this. No, so to discourage trade from that particular nation with which you are not on a favorable terms, right? So, because not all GATT members accept these plurilateral agreement, they were often informally called codes. So, there were many GATT members who did not accept these terms. They were not interested in holding on to these terms because they did not want intervention in their international policy or diplomacy. Now, so they were referred to as more informally, they were referred to as codes. Now, what do you mean by plurilateral? So, plurilateral agreement is happens when there is a multinational or legal or trade agreement happens between various countries or many countries. It is a multilateral agreement and not merely between two countries. It is not a bilateral but a multilateral agreement. So, so there were some members who were not interested between these agreements that happen between various countries, so they were called codes. Now, in response to the problems identified in the 1982 Ministerial Declaration, structural deficiencies, spillover impacts of certain countries' policies on world trade, GATT could not manage, etc. Now, as I said earlier during introduction, that due to changes in market and the dynamic and ever changing nature of the market, there came a time when GATT was not enough for managing these international agreements, and that is what is described here, that in response to the problems, there were many problems identified during 1982 ministerial declaration, where there were structural deficiencies or spillover impact of certain countries policy on world trade, GATT. Now, spillover impact means that the policies of certain countries had a huge impact or influenced the GATT between various countries. Why was that so? Because of politics. Because some countries predominantly enjoyed a favored position from a political point of view, which we can say about United States of America, since it's a very strong country both economically and politically. It has a huge influence over all international organizations which we all know about today, like International Monetary Fund, United Nations, WTO. Everywhere it in the country United States of America, USA, enjoys a huge impact and influence. It has, I could say, it has a veto power. So naturally this um, even though such kind of spillover impact of these countries' policies has lessened today, but it is still there on GATT. So the 8th GATT round happened, which is known as the Uruguay Round, which was launched in September 1986 in Punta del Este, Uruguay. It was the biggest negotiating mandate on trade ever agreed. The talks aimed to extend the trading system into several new areas, notably trade in services and intellectual property, and to reform trade in the sensitive sectors of agriculture and textiles. All the original GATT articles were up for review. Now, there were original GATT articles were up for review because the situation had changed totally. New factors had also come into existence, such as the burgeoning service sector, which was increasing at a very rapid pace, and introduction of intellectual properties. No, so for managing these, because in earlier GATT articles, there were no provisions for these sectors or these factors, because at that time they had not grown in such a huge deciding factor, or no in such a huge deciding factor. So for providing for these new changes or these new entrants in the political international political scenario, this GATT Uruguay round was conducted, and the final act concluding the Uruguay round and officially establishing the WTO regime was finally signed on 15th April 1994 during the ministerial meeting at Marrakesh, Morocco, and hence is known as the Marrakesh Agreement. So the final the final agreement was signed on 15th April 1994 in a place called Marrakesh, which is in Morocco, and hence it is called the Marrakesh Agreement. Now let us learn about Doha Round 2001 to present, the duration of which is 2001 to present. Now the WTO launched the current round of negotiations, the Doha Development Round, at the 4th Ministerial Conference in Doha, Qatar in November 2001. This was to be an ambitious effort to make globalization more inclusive and help the world's poor, particularly by slashing barriers and subsidies in farming. Progress stalled over differences between developed nations and the major developing countries on issues such as industrial tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade, particularly against between the EU and the US over their maintenance of agricultural subsidies seen to operate effectively as trade barriers. Now, these subsidies, other than, like I said, there other than tariffs, also there are many kind of trade barriers. So these subsidies were also kind of trade barriers, and often progress of the relationship or agreement between two countries, or many, I should say, multilateral countries, or many countries were stalled due to these barriers to trade. So for overcoming these and for ensuring globalization reaches all corners of the world and helps the world become an inclusive entity that everyone in where everyone develops, right? And to help the world's poor, particularly by slashing these barriers, this Doha round was conducted, and it is considered very ambitious. So repeated attempts to revive the talks proved unsuccessful, though the adoption of the Bali Ministerial Declaration in 2013 addressed bureaucratic barriers to commerce. So this was all about Doha round. Now, let us learn about objectives of WTO. So, the World Trade Organization is the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between various nations. At its heart are the WTO agreements negotiated and signed by the bulk of the world's trading nations and ratified in their parliament. So, of course, the various agreements are in effect the charter of WTO as an organization, because without those agreements, WTO can't function. So WTO functions on the basis of those negotiated and signed agreements between various trading nations of the world, which are then ratified in the respective parliaments of those nations. The goal is to ensure that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. It operates a global system of trade rules. It acts as a forum for negotiating trade agreements. It settles trade disputes between its members, and it supports the need of developing countries. So WTO also provides a lot of support to developing countries. It acts as a protector of their interests and also provides for dispute resolution or arbitration between various nations on the basis of these agreements that they have signed. Now, let's learn about organization structure of WTO. So, the highest authority of WTO is the Ministerial Conference, which must meet at least every 2 years. So, of course, they haven't put the entire power in the hands of a single person. So, there is a Ministerial Conference which meets every 2 years and which is the highest authority of this WTO. In between of each ministerial conference, the daily work is handled by three bodies whose membership is one and the same. They only differ by terms of reference under which each body is constituted. So these three bodies have similar membership, but they only differ in terms of reference of what areas they tackle. So there is this General Council, then Dispute Settlement Body, and Trade Policy Review Body. The General Council, whose chair as of 2020 is David Walker of New Zealand, has the following subsidiary bodies. Now, by the use of phrase "whose chair," the meaning is this: the David Walker is the chairman of the General Council. So, the subsidiaries of this General Council are Council for Trade in Goods. There are 11 committees under the jurisdiction of the Goods Council, each with a specific task. All members of the WTO participate in this committee. Then, Council for Trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, information on intellectual property in the WTO, news and official records of the activities of the TRIPS Council, and details of the WTO's work with other international organizations in the field. So, this Council for Trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, it deals with various information and agreements and protocols for intellectual property. It takes decision on trade related aspects of intellectual property rights. Then there is Council for Trade and Service. So the Council for Trade and Service operates under the guidance of General Council and is responsible for overseeing the function of it. More or less takes decisions regarding trade and services. So the General Council of WTO is divided in three major aspects, or it has been characterized into three major councils for three different areas, that is goods, intellectual property and services. Now this is the organizational chart of WTO. At the top is ministerial conference, then there is general policy, then there is general council, which is there is then committee on trade and environment, trade and development, subcommittee on least developed countries, regional trade agreements, balance of payment restrictions, budget, finance and administration. Then there are general council for dispute settlement body, then trade policy review body. These are the this is the body which takes major decisions regarding this is the body which reviews the agreements and various covenants and protocols, and then ensures that no country is flouting these WTO agreements, and it reviews time and again reviews the trade position of the countries. Then there is appellate body for dispute settlement, then plurilateral information technology agreement committee, council for trade in goods, then committee as these are the 11 committees that are in council for trade in goods, market access, agriculture, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, etc. Then there is general council for trade related aspect of intellectual property right, and then there is council for trade in services. In under council for trade and service there is trade in financial services, and then there is specific commitments, working parties on domestic regulations, general agreement in trade and services rules, etc. And then there is trade in civil aircraft committee, government procurement committee, etc., trade negotiation committee. So the trade negotiation committee covers Doha development agenda, which is trade negotiations committee and its bodies, and these are the various special councils under this Doha development, which is furthering the agenda of Doha development agenda, and these all come under trade negotiation committee. Now let us look at functions of WTO. So among the various functions of WTO, these are regarded as the most important. WTO oversees the implementation, administration and operation of the covered agreement, with the exception is that it does not enforce any agreement when China came into the WTO in 2001. It provides a forum for negotiation and for settling disputes. So additionally, it is WTO's duty to review and propagate the national trade policy and to ensure the coherence and transparency of trade policies through surveillance in global economic policy making. Surveillance means looking after, or it keeps an eye on various countries. It monitors the policies of various countries. Surveillance means monitoring. So it monitors the global economic policy of various countries, so that to ensure that no member country erects undue trade barriers, be it in the form of tariff or non-tariff. So WTO oversees the implementation administration of the covered agreement and also keeps surveillance, and it also settles disputes and acts as a forum or intermediary for negotiations between various countries. Another priority of WTO is the assistance of developing, least developed and low income countries in transition to adjust to WTO rules and disciplines through technical cooperation and training. So WTO is not merely about developed or fast developing nations. It also takes into account the needs and the assistance that the developing, least developed and low income countries require. The WTO shall facilitate the implementation, administration and operation and further the objectives of this agreement and of the multilateral trade agreements. And multilateral trade agreements means the agreements which has been signed between various countries and not just 2 or 3 countries, and shall also provide the framework for the implementation, administration and operation of the multilateral trade agreements. So WTO also provides this framework within which these agreements are implemented and administered and operated. So then the WTO shall provide the forum for negotiations among its members concerning their multilateral trade relations in matters dealt with under agreement in the annexes to this agreement. So it also, as I mentioned before, WTO also provides assistance as an intermediary for negotiation among its various members concerning this multilateral trade relations and agreements. So this was all about WTO. You can read about functions and organization of WTO both on Wikipedia or WTO.org, which is the official site of World Trade Organization. So this was all for today. Thank you.